Why do we so often follow the crowd, even when our own eyes are literally screaming at us that it's the wrong way to go? It's a question that gets at a fundamental truth about how our brains are wired, not just to think, but to survive in a social world. Let's dig into the psychology behind it.
I mean, really think about it. It sounds completely absurd, doesn't it? Of course not. You see what you see. But what if everyone around you, people who seem totally confident, all insisted you were wrong? How long do you think you could really hold out?
Back in the 1950s, a psychologist named Solomon Asch set up this brilliantly simple test. People would walk into a room with a few others and get shown two cards. One had a single line on it, the other had 3 lines. All they had to do was say which of the 3 lines matched the first one. Super easy. The answer was always completely obvious. But here's the twist. Only one person in that room was the actual participant. Everyone else, they were actors, and they were all told to give the same wrong answer.
And the results were just staggering. A full 75% of the real participants went along with the group's obviously wrong answer at least once. They said something they knew with their own eyes was incorrect. This wasn't about having bad vision. It was all about the crushing pressure to just fit in. So what is it that makes that pressure so ridiculously powerful?
Well, it turns out that most of our actions are being pulled by 2 powerful, invisible forces deep inside our brain's operating system. One part is ancient, programmed for pure survival. And the other part, it's all about being efficient in a very complicated world.
Think of it this way. We're all walking around running on some seriously ancient software. It was designed for a world where the biggest threats were, predators and starvation. And to navigate our complex, modern world, that ancient software relies heavily on mental shortcuts to make fast decisions. These two systems, our deep survival instincts and our brain's need for efficiency, they explain so much of how we act in groups.
For our ancestors, survival was all about the tribe. If you belonged, you had protection, you had food. But being cast out, that was basically a death sentence. And because of this, our brains developed what's called a negativity bias. We are literally wired to pay way more attention to potential dangers, like a disapproving look from someone in our group, than to potential rewards. To our ancient brain, social rejection felt like a physical threat, because, well, it was.
Now, on the flip side, our brain is also built to be efficient. I mean, it's lazy. We just can't sit around and analyze every single piece of information that comes our way. So we use these things called heuristics. They're just mental shortcuts. And one of the biggest ones is social proof. When we're not sure what to do, we look at what everyone else is doing. If they're all running, we run too. It's a quick, easy rule. If others are doing it, it's probably the right thing to do. It also helps us avoid that really uncomfortable feeling of cognitive dissonance. That mental static you get when your beliefs and your actions don't line up? It's just so much easier to go with the flow.
So you've got this ancient, efficient brain. How does it cope in our modern world of social media feeds and nonstop information? Well, it creates these incredibly powerful echo chambers that don't just confirm what we believe, they actually make our beliefs more extreme.
The first ingredient in this recipe is something called confirmation bias. This is our brain's natural habit of acting like a personal defense attorney for our existing beliefs. We actively go looking for evidence that proves we're right, and we find clever ways to ignore or discredit or just explain away anything that suggests we might be wrong.
And the second ingredient is in-group bias. We are tribal creatures, plain and simple. We instinctively like and trust people we see as being part of us. We give them the benefit of the doubt. And at the same time, we're naturally much more wary and suspicious of the out-group or them.
And this is a recipe for so much of the division we see today. You take our brain's tendency to only look for proof it's right, and you combine it with our instinct to favor our own tribe, and you get a really powerful psychological effect.
It's called group polarization. And what the research shows is pretty wild. When you get a group of people who already agree on an issue to talk about it, their opinions don't just get reinforced, they actually get more extreme. A slight leaning becomes a hardened conviction. It's exactly why online discussions can get so toxic so fast. The algorithms feed us what we want to hear, surrounded by our in-group, and the whole system just pushes us further and further apart.
Now, this whole group dynamic doesn't just shape our beliefs. It can literally paralyze our actions. So let's look at one of the most disturbing parts of crowd psychology, why in an emergency, being in a crowd can be the worst possible thing.
It's called the bystander effect, and it's one of the most counterintuitive findings in social psychology. You'd think, right, more people means a better chance someone will help. But the reality is the complete opposite. The question is, why? Okay, imagine you're the only person who sees someone collapse on the street. In that moment, 100% of the responsibility to do something is on you. It's your problem, there's nobody else to look to. But now, what happens if there are 10 other witnesses standing around? All of a sudden, your personal sense of responsibility just plummets. You might only feel, 10% responsible? You figure someone else will step in, someone more qualified, someone who's not in a rush. This is the first hurdle, and it's called the diffusion of responsibility.
So there are really 3 big hurdles that stop us from helping. The first is that diffusion of responsibility we just talked about. Someone else will handle it. The second is called pluralistic ignorance. This is where everyone is looking to everyone else to figure out how serious the situation is. But since nobody wants to be the one to overreact, everyone tries to look calm. So the crowd's inaction sends a signal that everything must be fine. And the third hurdle is evaluation apprehension. That's just a fancy term for the fear of looking stupid. What if they don't actually need help? What if I do CPR wrong? A crowd turns the act of helping into a public performance, and we are all terrified of getting a bad review.
I know. It's a pretty bleak picture, right? It seems like our brains are just hardwired to conform, to divide, and to stand by and do nothing. But the very same experiments that uncovered these weaknesses also revealed a surprisingly powerful solution.
Let's go back to that line experiment for a second. The researcher, Ash, tried a variation. He had just one of the actors break from the group and give the correct answer. The result? Conformity dropped by as much as 80%. Just one person was enough to break the spell. Suddenly, having just one ally made it dramatically easier for the real participant to trust their own eyes.
This famous quote from the psychologist Stanley Milgram just nails it. Our character isn't some fixed, constant thing. Good people can be led to do nothing or even worse, just by the power of the situation. But the hopeful part of that is that it also means we have the power to change the situation.
And that is the absolute key here. The big takeaway. The person who speaks up first doesn't just share their own opinion. They give social permission to everybody else who is silently thinking the same thing. They make it safe for others to find their own voice. Whether that's questioning a bad idea in a meeting or being the first one to ask if a person in trouble needs help, that one first move changes everything for everyone else.
So, when you understand the immense power of group pressure, but you also understand the equally immense power of a single dissenting voice, the question isn't just about how crowds work. The question is about deciding what your role inside of that crowd is going to be.